Hello, how y'all doing today? My name is Bernie Thompson, and today we're here to take a look at this 2017 Chevrolet Malibu. This Chevy has a problem to where it has an intermittent starting problem. I guess sometimes it starts, sometimes it doesn't start. So the first thing I really want to do is get the scan tool and get some data out of the engine control module. So let's go ahead and get a scan tool connected to this Chevy. I have the scan tool up and I'm gathering some data. The first thing I notice is that the barrel's not reading right. It says the barrel is misreading. So if I came over to digital and I'm reading my barrel, I've only got 49 kPa. I'm a mile high here. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm 5,500 feet. So this should be reading 83. So the barrel definitely is misreading, and that could definitely give me a start issue. So that's something I want to look at for sure. But I do have 5 DTCs, and none of the monitors have been run. And we already know that. They've been working on this car. And I can see I have a computer over here and I have connectors over here. So they've been working on the car for a bit. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe that's because they swapped the computer or something. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and get the DTCs. So we have the B camshaft. That's the exhaust cam is too far advanced. Now, if the exhaust cam is too far advanced, that would definitely give me a hard start and a drivability problem. I also have an exhaust gas, and we have the map sensor, Ranger Performance, and we know that's not reading right. So the computer, the eSCAN picked that up, but I also have a code for that, so that's pretty cool. And I have an actual airflow. It's not reading correctly. It's not within the range of where it should be. Now, if I have a cam at a time, it would definitely give me that problem. So really, the first thing that I want to do is I want to go and I want to get a scope on this, and I want to check the cam, and I want to see if the cams are in or out of time, because that's really my most likely cause for some type of an intermittent starting and drivability issue. So let's go ahead and get the scope put on this vehicle and let's test it. So I looked up a wiring diagram for this vehicle, and I found the circuits and the wires that I wanted to get into. So let's go over those. So at the engine control module, I got channel 1 in yellow, and I'm connected to the crankshaft position sensor. Channel 2 in red, I've connected to the intake camshaft sensor. Channel 3, which is green, I connected to the exhaust camshaft sensor. And channel 4, 5, 6, and 7, that's the blue, white, purple, and orange, go to cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, and cylinder 4 for the ignition coil fire. And then for channel 8, I'm connected to the injector for number 1. Now I've used an amp clamp so we can watch the current base. It's much easier. So if I see the current turn on, I'll know. Now, the reason that I've done this is because I've got the inputs which create the outputs. The inputs are the crank and the cam sensors. That's how the program is going to figure out where in space this engine is. In other words, what stroke it's on. At that point, then the computer takes that data and it makes these commands, and that's my coils and my injectors. So what I'm interested in are these pieces, and now we're going to go get the data and we'll try to figure out what's wrong with this vehicle. Let's get the scope set up for our probes. On channel 8, I have a 20 amp, so I want to bring that up, and then we want to just zero it in the scope. I want to make sure that everything is connected. So what I'm looking at are these squares here. If any one of these are red, it's an indication that I haven't made a good connection. Many times when we're back probing connections, we don't have the back probe in connection with the connector or the wire. What this provides me is a way to check it really quick once I've connected. So we're all ready to get the data. So what we want to do is we want to come over here, and now we just want to record it. So now let's go ahead and start this thing up and see what we get. So that time it started right up. So let's see what we've got here. I want to go ahead and I want to separate these. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and go back out. We want our zoom window. We want to look at these cam and cranks. Okay, so the blue is the number one. So let's take a look at what happened here. It started up, so I didn't have a problem that time. It started right up, in fact. So we can see that the number one fired. I have a cam, and we're narrow, narrow, wide, wide. And this is the intake cam. And here we have a narrow, narrow, wide, wide on the exhaust cam. Now right off, the exhaust cam is in the wrong position. I can see that. So I'll show you that here in just a second. But this number one cylinder right here is firing on the second wide. Short, short, wide, wide. So I'm okay there. And then this edge right here of this cam is coming into this tooth right here. It's about 2-3 teeth. Now this usually, and these are phased, so it's hard to say, but when I've looked at these before, they sit at about 4 teeth, somewhere in there, 3 to 4 teeth, so this is really close. And then this edge in the center, this rising edge usually sits right on this front edge here, so this is a little off. So this cam is a little off, but this engine is cold. Well, I just started. I guess they had it running because I have some temperature on the gauge. I think they were moving the car around. So at any rate, this is my injector right here. And notice my injector fired at the right time. So I want to mark this. We're going to need to mark it no matter what. So I want to move this on my ignition. And I want to move that on my ignition. Now we're going to mark that. And this, what I want to show you is if we look from cylinder fire to cylinder fire, this is one complete fire cycle. So on this, if I'm only looking at cylinder one, this would be my power stroke, my exhaust stroke, my induction stroke, and my compression. Notice that the injector fired on time, right in this window of where it should, where the intake valve opened, and it's right about where I usually see them. They need to be at least 30 to 60 after this top dead center mark. The valve opens, and then we start to get the injection phases on these GDI engines. And then this guy fired, and I can see that that happened right in the middle of this second window. Short, short, long, long. Now, the one that I see that's wrong is this short, short right here for the exhaust. This cam, so we're going to get the cursor, and I want to put it on that front edge, and I'm going to get this cursor. And do you see how I've got a short, short, long, long? This first short fits right in between these. So roughly, it should be somewhere right in here. Now, that says I'm about 257 degrees out of time. So that's a lot. I mean, the engine I don't think runs bad enough when I rev it. I've got to reduce power up on the window, but if this cam was that far off, I don't think it would start. For surely I don't think it would rev like that. So I don't think the cam is out of time. That seems more like a trigger wheel is off. So the exhaust cam is definitely off, and the intake cam is correct. And then these are firing in the correct order, where it's blue, purple, orange, white, blue. And if we look through here, none of them are breaking down. We can see that these are all still there. So this seems okay. So Since it's been running just a little bit now, let's go ahead and get the data again just to see if anything changed, because it could. Always like to get multiple pieces of data to make decisions on. Get my zoom window, we'll come back in. We got a fire cycle from cylinder 1 to cylinder 1. Let's go ahead and we'll raise the yellow just a little bit. So this window here, that rising edge should be over on this edge here. So this is a little off. Now this is really close. I mean, this is within 10 degrees or so. This is way off. So once again, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get our cursors because I want to double check this. Now that we've had this engine running for just a few minutes. So we're going to go ahead and mark it. So what I want to see is how far this is off. So we're going to go to that edge there and that front edge there. I'm about 11-12 degrees off from that, where that shows, and over here again, so I'm about 10-12 degrees off on the intake cam. But this exhaust cam, once again, if we look at this short, right about in the middle of those is where this guy should be. So roughly, again, I'm 230, 240 degrees off. So the exhaust cam is definitely off, so I got a problem. Now the car started right up and I didn't have a problem. So what I want to do is we want to go ahead and restart this. We want to shut it off, and let's see if it will. Every time I've started it started right up at this point, but I guess it doesn't do that. Oh, cool. So we got a no start here. So now let's see what happened. So again, we want to separate these out. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, that's cool. Number 1 isn't firing where it should be. Look at where number 1 fired. Short, it fired here. And now, number 4 fired over here, the opposite plane. Okay, so so that's really cool. Okay, so look at this. Do you see that's number 1 right there in blue? He fired here. Well, he should be firing over here where this one is. It's 180 out. It's a fire cycle off, crank off. Did anybody break down? So we're looking at these, and what I want to see is if anybody broke down. And you guys might be saying right now, do you see where the injector is firing right next to this? Let me get my cursors. I want to show you this. This is normal on these cars. So what I see is we're going to do this right here, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to mark that. Now, you can see, remember before this injector was firing on the intake stroke? So if I went fire cycle, fire from number 1 to number 1, now this would become my power stroke, my exhaust stroke, my intake stroke, and this is the compression. And do you see how I'm firing that injector roughly 30 to 60? Right in here, do you see that's top dead center, that's 30, that's 60, that's the injector. That's okay. When I'm cranking one of these engines, this has to do with an emission control. So on GDI engines, to have this fire and have a late firing point, late means that the injector fired very close to top dead center, not in the induction system. During start, most of the cars I check do this. The only cars I see that don't do this is Kia and Hyundai doesn't do this, but most of the other cars do. So that's normal, so don't get confused and think that's off, because that's not. all this data, we can see that everybody is staying in place. Okay guys, this is something I don't see. This is really different. This is really different. What I normally see when I get a cam way out of time like this is these signals all break down. They come, they go, they drop, they may be there a few times and then they're off. The reason for that is the computer has an algorithm, or it's running a math equation that's figuring out where the engine model is. The engine model is built by these edges. All these edges go into a program against a clock, and they're timing the crank against these cam sensors so they can figure out where crank angle space is. If you think about this, the crankshaft can only give me where the piston position is. If I have an indexing position in the crank sensor, that along with my other pulses will tell me where the crank is. So I'm at top dead number 1, I'm at bottom dead number 1. But it can't tell me the strokes. If I make a crank revolution and I go to the top, that's top dead, and then I go down, and then I go top dead. Now when I was at top dead, I could be on exhaust, or I could be on fire, compression. And then, so we use these, the intake pulses, and the intake tells it crank angle space. So if I look at these edges from the cam, it tells me where crank angle space is. When I'm at top dead center, I'm on exhaust. The next time I'm on compression, it knows my 4 strokes now. In other words, it can figure out that I'm on the power stroke, the exhaust stroke, the intake stroke, and the compression stroke. When I see these get out, I don't see these stay in order. This is, that's really unusual. So normally when I get a cam sensor, it does something different. So I'm not sure. So I want to do one more time. We want to go ahead and crank it again. I want to see if it's going to start or not. And that time it started right up. So once again, let's just take a look at this. And that time the engine died, which is really interesting because they didn't say anything about dying. I'm here to look at a starting issue. Now this time, let me zoom in so you can see this better. Do you see how the blue number 1 fired over here in the wide? Narrow, narrow, wide, wide. Well, now I'm over here, and I fired and it started. Oh, how cool. It didn't start again. So it's doing just what the shop told me it was going to do. Look at number 1. It's not firing on the wide, wide. Do you see how the orange one right here is firing on the wide? This one is not. So, okay, that's crazy. I just don't see them where they don't break down. They always break down when the cams are out of time. And I mean, I have some starter noise here on these signals, but I don't think that's enough to cause any kind of problem like this. Okay, so I'm not sure what's causing the problem right now. But the cam is out of time, and the cam will definitely give me a problem similar to this, but not where it goes out 180. What I want to go do is I want to put a compression transducer in cylinder 1, and I want to check the engine compression against the cam timing so I can figure out if the cam timing's off, because the engine sort of feels like it runs okay. It's not hundreds of degrees off. It's like something's wrong with the trigger wheel or the sensor. So the way I'm going to figure this out is by using a pressure transducer. So let's go ahead and get the pressure transducer into this engine. So I put a tailpipe sensor into the exhaust, and that's on channel 1. So on channel 2, I moved it to the #1 coil fire position. Channel 3 now is a 300-pound pressure transducer in cylinder 1. Channel 4 is now a -30 in the intake, so we got vacuum, so we can match the vacuum against the poles so we can see what's going on there. Now I've moved channel 5 to the CKP. Channel 6 is on the intake cam, channel 7 is on the exhaust cam, and then channel 8 is still on #1 injector. So now let's go ahead and get that data. So we've installed our pressure transducers onto this Malibu's engine. Now we need to set the scope up for them. So on channel 1, we want to go in and we want to pick the 25 inches of water. That's the tailpipe sensor. Channel 2 is at 500. Channel 3 is the 300-pound pressure transducer. Channel 4 is the -30 pressure transducer. So now is what I want to do is I want to go and just zero these, so now we have a zero place. Now we want to come over and we want to make sure that we're all connected, our lights are out. So we're connected and we're ready to get data. So now all we got to do is go to the measure and deep record like this, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to start the deep record reading, and we'll see what we're going to get here. Okay, we're going to stop that. Okay, so now is what I want to do is we want to go ahead and get this. We want to look at this waveform. So we want to get our cursors. And the first thing I can see is the towers are pretty even once I put that through. Let's go ahead and mark them. Now is what we want to do is we want to come down here and open this up. This is the crank sensor in white now. I've moved it. So I want to go ahead and I want to shut some of this other stuff off for right now. So the one thing I can see is that channel 2 is now my target. That's the ignition for #1. Do you see how it's firing halfway? It is not firing on the peak tower. So that's somewhat of a problem. We've already seen that though. We know that that's happening, right? We saw that. So now you can confirm it with a pressure tower and you know that it's off. So the #1, when we didn't start, the #1 coil is firing in the middle. What I'm interested in right now is this trace right here. So let's go ahead and let's blow this up just a little bit so we can get all these traces here. And then I want to just remark it. Okay, now this exhaust cam right here, this is my exhaust cam pocket. And that exhaust cam is falling at about the 30. So I'm going to get the cursors and we're going to come measure where that's sitting. We want that really to be sitting roughly between 30 and 60 during a crank. So if I measure right at that pocket, I'm at 30. Okay guys, that's in time. That's telling me that that exhaust is close to time. It's not hundreds of degrees out. And that's what I thought, because it started and it ran. So something's going on with the target wheel on this, but the exhaust is in time. So now is what we can do is we can look at the intake. And the other thing that I want to show you guys, do you see this marker right here? Do you see on this green marker where it came right up through the bottom? Do you see how in the yellow trace, this is my push. So this is more vacuum, this is more pressure. This is more negative, this is more positive. More negative, more positive. Well, what's happening right here is the valve, it opened over here, it fell, and then the air rushed back into that cylinder because we didn't have any fire. It's not firing on time. And then it came across, and this is my push. Now, right when that valve opened, do you see where I opened, and right after that this falls? This says that that valve opened on this pocket, and I can see that I had fluid communications in the exhaust. When you see this fall, do you see how I had this come across? That's where we opened, and then we have just a little bit of time, and then it fell. Well, the little bit of time is the volume that's in the exhaust. That exhaust has a bunch of volume, and I've got to change the pressure in the exhaust to make this fall. Now notice how this pocket is made in a vacuum, and notice how this follows this pocket, but there's some latency between where this pocket is and this one. That's because I can't start to make this pocket till I open the valve up. The valve opened right there and I fell. So I can see two places where the camshaft opened the exhaust valve, and it's about 33 degrees is what I'm looking at. This is 33 degrees, that's my marker, 35. And I can prove that with the exhaust pressure transducer in the exhaust. Now when we look at the intake, we come over here, and the intake actually looks like it's advanced a little bit. But the intake cam, that one's pretty close, right? So that was about 12 degrees or so off from what I'm familiar with. So what I want to do is I want to just clean this waveform up just a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to turn off all the other ones, and I'm going to leave my pressure transducers. And now you can see that we have better look here. It's a little cleaner. So I'm going to take my cursor and I'm going to measure right over. Do you see where this was falling? And then I have this hitch. That's where that valve opened, is right there. So if I come over here and we look right here, now we've got about 24 degrees. Well, my target for that, rule of thumb target, both of these are rule of thumbs obviously, but the rule of thumb target is about 30 to 60, and I'm really close to doing that on that cam. So the intake cam looks okay. Now the other place that I can check the intake cam is I can come over here. Do you see where this hitched right here? It opened a little bit before top dead center, and that's about 12 degrees early. So the intake cam and the exhaust cam are in time. Neither of them are hundreds of degrees out. This would start and run the motor. So now the trigger wheel is off, because if the camshaft is on, the exhaust trigger has to be off somehow, and I don't know how this attaches or what the trigger is. We're going to figure that out. But I have another concern. I was not hired to tell them the cam is out. I was hired to tell them why the car wouldn't start. And I'm a little concerned right now. I'm not sure. The cam being out would cause a problem. And from all the things, my experience is when I've got cam targets that are out, the outputs, the inputs are the crank and the cams, and that sets up crank angle spacer, where the engine is in space, what stroke I'm on. When it can't figure that out, the math doesn't add up, and I start losing those signals, or they're out of place. These are all in order, none of them fell out, they're just 180 out. It's almost like they're not watching those cam sensors. And if they're not watching, if one cam sensor's off, they didn't revert to start looking at the other cam sensor that's on. It sounds crazy, but this is just what I'm thinking right now. And it seems like that's programmed, because that is not what I expect. It seems like the cam sensor, they're not using them, and so I have a 50-50 chance of firing off of the crank. So what I want to do is I want to ground out the signal that goes to the exhaust cam first, and I want to take it away, and then it can't confuse the computer. If I still have a problem, I want to ground out the intake cam sensor, and I want to see if I have the problem. If I take both cam sensors away and I have the same starting problem, then somehow the computer is in some backup and it's only trying to calculate this from the crank input. I've never seen this, but I know something's wrong with the way these signals are made. So this is how I want to go about proving if I'm right or I'm wrong. I have no idea, but I'm going to ground the exhaust cam first, and we're going to see if we can fix it or not. And then I'll ground the intake, and if it stays in the same pattern, once it sees the cam is that far off, it doesn't use it. It's reverting to use the crank sensor to do this calculation, and that's why it's a 50-50 shot, and that's almost what it seems like as I'm looking at the data. So let's go ahead and get that sensor grounded. This is my exhaust cam sensor right here. So what I want to do is I want to run a ground lead right to ground, and that takes that signal away. Now, if the computer cannot see those edges, it can't figure out it's out of time. So that eliminates the trigger wheel that's not in time with the motor. So now let's go ahead and see what the computer's going to do with that data. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to turn all my other channels back on. Now, we can see that both cams are there. They're in purple and orange right now, and white is my crank sensor. So they're all present. What I want to do now is we want to go ahead and start recording. And it didn't start. Let's make sure that I've got that grounded. So now you can see that only the purple's there and the orange is gone. So I have grounded it, and here we can see that this is my ignition, this is the injector, the ignition, and here's my narrow, narrow, wide, wide. That ignition should be over here. Narrow, narrow, wide, wide, and here's my peak tower, and it's not there. So it doesn't have that signal. So it couldn't have confused it, right? Because I've got it grounded. So this is the intake signal, and this is the signal that was in time. The exhaust was the one that was out, and I've got it grounded. Let's try that again. But I already saw it's doing the same thing. And that time it started. Shut it off. So let's get our zoom. And here we can see that we have our target right here, and this is top dead center, and we're going to zoom in right here, and we can see that that red trace is right there. So I fired correctly. Narrow, narrow, wide, wide, and the red fired. So it's still doing the exact same thing, guys, and I've got it grounded. So now what I want to do is let's go ground the intake cam where we have no cam inputs into this microprocessor at all. And will it even start? I'm pretty sure it's in a default right now. I think it's going to do the same thing, but I really don't know. Let's go get that grounded and find out. The intake cam is on the back, and I've connected a ground wire, and I've brought it up, and we've got it grounded to the bolt. So now I won't have a intake cam sensor input. We've taken it away from the microprocessor, so now we'll have no cam inputs. And let's go see if it starts or if it does the same strategy that we have right now. So let's go ahead and start the engine. Okay, the intake and the exhaust cams are both grounded. There's going to be no signals. So what we want to go ahead and do is see what's going to happen. So it didn't start. So I want to go ahead and take my zoom window, and I want to come in now. And I can see that I still had my injector and my coil fire, and they're 180 out. So the strategy, the backup strategy is if I don't have any cam sensors, it's not going to not fire anything. It still tries to start the car. So right here, let's go ahead and zoom in on these so I can show you. Do you see how I had my injector fire and my coil fire, and these are my two compression towers that go up? That's pretty crazy. I wouldn't have thought that. This is really different. So apparently they're not diverting. If you got one cam sensor out, they're not diverting to the other cam sensor and using the intake, because that's what I would have thought. But there's really something different with this particular car. So what I want to go ahead and do is I want to try this again. So now that we've got that, let's try this again. Started right up. No cam signals. So let's go ahead, here, let's shut this guy off. Guys, this is just too cool. This is really cool, I gotta say. Do you see where I fired the injector now? I've got multiple fires on the injector, so let me show you. This is a good thing. Okay, so I fired my coil at the right time, and now I have this injector right before and this one over in the intake. Now a lot of times when I see an injector fire like that, it's when the engine is cold. So I'm not sure, but it definitely diverted and it fired the engine and we started. And as you can see, we have no cam sensors, but they're on. They've got them grounded, but I have a crank sensor. We'll turn the crank on. So all the sensors are on right now. Let me go ahead and separate that one out. So the two cams are not present. In other words, the microprocessor, it doesn't even have the data for the edges to figure out where crank angle space is. But no matter what, if I've got that crank and I go from index to index to index and I pick the spot where number one is, because it knows when number one is at top dead center, I can try to start the car still. And that's what's going on here. This vehicle is in a default, so it's just defaulting because the cam timing is so far out. So what we're going to need to do is to get the shop's going to need to take the valve cover off and figure out what's wrong with the trigger. The cams are in time. We can clearly see that the cam timing is correct, and we can verify that through the intake pull, the exhaust push, and the in-cylinder waveform. We don't have a cam problem. We have an exhaust trigger problem. So I'm going to go talk to the shop and give them the data, and they're going to need to pull the valve cover off and we'll figure out what's wrong. And then once we figure it out, I'll come back and we'll film the end of this for you guys. But this is a cool car. This really is. I haven't had one quite like this, but this is really a neat car. So I definitely want to come back when we see what's wrong with the trigger wheel. And so we'll see you then. Okay guys, the shop has put this Malibu back together. They've installed a new camshaft in it. Now what we need to do now is get some basic data. The car is fixed and it starts every time now. I've got channel 1 yellow on the crank sensor, channel 2 red is on the intake, channel 3 green is on the exhaust, channel 4 blue is on the number 1 ignition coil, and channel 5 and 6 white and purple are on the injector for number 1. Let's go ahead and start the car up a few times and take a look at the data. Now we have the scope. Let's go ahead and get the data. So what I want to do is I want to come over here. I want to start the scope. I want to start the car. Now as we can see, it started right up. Let's do it again. Now as what we can see right here is it's starting right away, and we can see that as soon as we have the signals coming in, we start to have commands going out. And that's really what we'd expect on this. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to zoom in on this and we're going to take a look at it. So shut those channels off, we're not using them. We can see right here that we barely rotated and we start to have edges. We get one index point and right away we're firing, and we're firing in time, and the car starts now. You also notice that we have a little bit of noise on these signals. That is from the starter, and that's okay. That's not too much noise. And you can see how the noise clears off and then it gets much better. So what I want to do now is I want to look at this this cam timing here. So we'll come in and we can see where the injector, this is a GDI injector, and I'm going to show you that signal here in just a second, but we fired the injector and then we did 2 fires over here, one really close to top dead, and this one also is close to top dead, and that's very normal when we start cars. And if they're cold, sometimes I'll get an extra injection point, just depends on the system and who calibrated the car. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and I want to get one fire cycle. This is the ignition event to ignition event. So if we take that and we blow this up, now we can see our indexing positions, and that's the index so the crank can figure out where it's at. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take these right here, and what I want to do is I want to go up off this falling edge on the intake cam. Should cross roughly about 4 teeth from that position, and it is now. And this indexing point should be about 2 to 3 teeth in. So again, we can see that that's about 2-3 teeth in. So we're good. These cams are in time. And if you notice, we have a short, short, long, long, and we have a short, short, long, long. And this short is in between these two, and the position against the crank is what we're really weighing this out at. So now it's starting. Now, if you guys look at GDI injectors, so this is a GDI injector, and you'll see that if you're in both wires for the GDI injector, you will have a double pulse. So basically, you'll have something that looks like this. And sometimes these can be confusing. Just be aware it takes both wires to make it the signal. So this wire is sending voltage up through the injector, the white trace is, and the purple one is my ground leg. So when you look at these, don't get confused, because sometimes it's hard to tell when they're firing them. Look at the second wire, and the one that's flat, that's the injector that's firing. So right now this injector is firing, and this is the amount of on time. And if we go over here, we'll see that the same thing happened, and here we have a couple of fires right here in a row, and we can see that they actually did fire because this injector is being held low. And that's all there is to that. It's a real simple system to diagnose. Basically, when you're looking at injectors, and you want to make sure that you have the correct current as well. But basically, we're looking at the cam and crank, and the cams and cranks are putting an output out to make these signals happen in time. And that's what wasn't happening before, right? The cam signal was incorrect, so it just disregarded both of those cam signals, and that's something I don't see. So it's really an interesting car, because normally if I see a cam out, the car has a problem where it just won't start, or it runs extremely bad because the timing signals are off. But for the processor to just not look at either cam when one of the cams is good and not use that, but just go to a strategy, a backup strategy of looking at the crank sensor, just something I've not seen a lot. So since I've got this car running, what I want to do is I want to go out and I want to ground each one of these in turn, and I want to see if the car starts, or if it starts to go back into a reversion to where it's just going to take a 50-50 shot off of the crank. So it's just something I haven't seen a lot, so I want to play with it. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to ground the red trace, the intake first, and then we'll ground the green trace, the exhaust. So let me go ahead and ground that intake cam and see what happens. So I've got the intake cam grounded, so let's go ahead and get the data. It starts every time. Okay guys, so what that's telling me right there, let's make sure that it's grounded for sure here, and let's turn these off. You can see that the red trace is at ground level. It is grounded. So what that's telling me is they're using the exhaust cam to keep this engine in time. It's not taking a 50-50 shot or guessing at where it is. It's actually still using the exhaust cam. So now let's go ahead and ground out the exhaust cam and let's see what happens. I've got the exhaust cam grounded now, so let's go ahead and get some data. Oh wow, long start. That was cool. Okay, so now, do you see how long it took from when we started to get signals to where we started to make the command structures? Just look at, this is where we started to get our signals. Look at how long it took to start. Before, when I had the intake cam grounded, it started right up. I had a problem right there. So now I want to go ahead and I want to see if that continues. Wow. You can see how long the hard start is. That's using the exhaust cam. So let's do that one more time just to make sure that the correct thing is going. That's really different, okay? Every time is a long start there. So, well, I was actually sort of missing there for a second. It didn't feel like it was running quite right. So let's go ahead and again, a long start. Okay guys, that's really cool because that starts to show you how things are programmed sometimes. It appears that there's more weight put on the exhaust cam than on the intake cam, which is different. You wouldn't expect that. I would expect if I lost or I had a problem with the exhaust cam, I'd revert to the intake. And if I had an intake problem, I'd revert to the exhaust. But apparently they've weighted the exhaust on this calibration more than the intake, it would appear from our testing. So this car is fixed and it's ready to return to the customer. What I really want you guys to take away from this is the procedure that we did. This is an event-driven diagnostic plan where you make a test, understand what the data, why are you doing the test? What does the data represent? Once you have those things, then you get the data, you will know what the next test will be and you'll be correct. If you follow a structure like this and you have great tools, you too will have good troubleshooting in your base.